Welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We have come to the end of the book of Second Samuel.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice.
It's sort of a weird end. There's 3 chapters left, and
it's very weird.
The three chapters almost don't feel like they should go together a little bit.
Right.
I mean, there's highs, there's lows. I mean, it's sort of a good end to a book with highs and lows, right?
Except you would expect at the end of this book that David dies.
Yeah.
Or I would. He doesn't.
No, he's going to slide into First Kings
for a while. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So here's what's going on. So David's son Absalom has been killed.
Yeah.
And David lamented. He should.
Yeah.
Right. There was also a second attempt to divide the kingdoms, and that's been resolved too, and that was all last week. And we had a couple of entries that we read about last week that seemed out of order.
Yeah.
And we kind of see the same thing this week. And it's not that they're necessarily out of order, but people are
sort of
putting things in, summarizing.
Right? I mean, because
things.
we really are, even though, you mentioned that David doesn't die in 2 Samuel, this is
his death.
Yeah, the end of his reign. So there's a lot of summary that's going on. A couple of events, but mostly summarization.
Yeah, and we even talk when we get into 1 Kings, there was an overlap period with Solomon and David for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So who's really in charge during those
and that
times?
actually happened a lot. It's called a co-regency, being the king royal. And that happened in most cases, actually, especially with long-time kings. They would spend a couple of years handing off the kingdom to their successor.
It's a great idea on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, the new king coming in, he gets a chance to ramp up. The old king's kind of easing back. And taking the burden off.
Yeah. Goes into retirement. He doesn't have to go into the office as often.
Yeah. Oh, that's your problem.
A little bit of golf, whatever.
Yeah. All right, so one of the chapters of the first chapter we're in is chapter 22, and it turns out this whole chapter is a song.
Yeah.
The whole thing's a song, and we kind of forget sometimes when we think back on David's life that he was a shepherd, he was a warrior. I mean, remember he killed Goliath.
Yeah, well, he's been a king for a long time.
Right.
And
Well, but even before that, he was in the king's army, and he was in the king's court, and then he was a king, but he was always a musician too,
all the way
all
through.
along. So it's really fitting here.
Yeah.
And this song in chapter 22, it's also in Psalm 18.
18. It's almost identical, not exactly identical, but if you compare Psalm 18 with 2 Samuel 22, a few words and phrases here and there, but it's like almost copy and paste.
Lift and paste.
Yeah. It really is.
Well, good.
My guess is that a little bit of verbiage, but Psalm 18 gets this heading for the music director. Okay, so there's a good chance that before it was sent over to the priests and to be used in official whatevers, it's like, we're going to tweak the tune a little bit. We're going to change the lyrics up to fit a little bit better, whatever. But overall, it's a song of God's faithfulness and God's characteristics and everything.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I also see it as a story of David's life.
Yeah.
Right. So it starts out with I, and certainly David had a bunch of family flaws, but throughout it all, he always put God first, and we see it throughout. So he says, I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise. I was delivered from my enemies. And then later and later in the song, it ends with the plural and the kingly we's.
Yeah.
He gives his king magnificent victories. He is faithful to his chosen ruler. And he even brings in the Davidic covenant, to David and his descendants forever. So it's well worth a read, and it's kind of a recap. Of David's reign in life.
It's interesting that I wonder if this was well known enough, because I'm looking at verse 5. The waves of death engulfed me, the currents of chaos overwhelmed me, the ropes of Sheol tightened around me, the snares of death trapped me. That if I would just read that, you might think Jonah, not David.
Right.
Right? And you're like, man, that sounds like Jonah's prayer. Jonah 2.
Yeah.
And the depths of the sea were exposed and all. So there's all of this word picture of nature language, and of course David was a nature guy, out there, like you said, shepherd and warrior and everything. I wonder if maybe that was in Jonah's head, Jonah's mind when he was writing his own thing.
Yeah, maybe. Chapter 23, we find David's last testament, which is kind of cool, and it's a fitting summary, and it fits in with the song that we just read in 22. Really, God picked David, and He stuck with him. David wasn't perfect. David certainly sinned, but he also returned to God.
Yeah.
And if we think back to Saul, that none of that happened with Saul.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
right. Saul first tried things on his own. Then when things didn't work out and he didn't have any other choice, let's try God.
Let's ask God.
And then he's surprised when God doesn't help.
Right. Yeah. Check out verse 1 in chapter 23. These are the final words of David. You said it's sort of his last testament. Right? The oracle of David, son of Jesse. Okay. The oracle of the man raised up as the ruler chosen by the God of Jacob. Okay. Mm-hmm. Check out this line. Israel's beloved singer of songs. Okay, that's just sort of cool. Maybe you don't write it about yourself, but if it's true, it's not bragging, right?
Right. Just putting it out there. It's the way I want to be remembered.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he's writing his own eulogy, right?
Yeah. Verses 8 through the end talk about David's warriors, which is definitely different. But these would be the men in his life that helped him as a warrior king.
Yeah.
Now Joab certainly shows up a ton of times in here, but he doesn't show up in this list.
Not in this list, because Joab was he was the commanding general of Israel's army, right? These guys are called the 30. This is sort of like an elite task force. Yeah. I think special forces, right. Your Green Berets, your Rangers, your SEALs, your whatever, right? This is your elite task force. And what's interesting is even though they're called the 30, at the very last verse, it says altogether there were 37. Well, why are they called the 30 if there are 37? Well, because some of them died and had to be replaced, and so it was a group of 30. What I find interesting is the last person mentioned is Uriah the Hittite.
So he shows up in
Bathsheba's husband,
right?
Who David had killed. But what we find out here, almost in passing, is that he wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't even just a well-decorated soldier or a trusted soldier. He was
one of the
David's elite inner groups.
Yeah, and David still took his wife and had him killed.
Yeah. Which takes that whole event, that account, and makes it worse. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I just found that it's just really interesting, and that there's some really cool stuff in here though. As about the people they're recounting. Then this guy did this and this guy did this. You're gonna have fun reading this because this is sort of cool.
Well, and it is one of those things. You're reading the names, and I happen to gloss over a lot of names, and I think people do, but there's also the actions that they did.
Yeah, don't gloss over this part of the chapter. You're gonna be tempted to, but there's some pretty cool stuff in here.
Yeah. All right, then at the end of the week, we're going to be in chapter 24.
Yep.
And in chapter 24, David takes a census. Mm-hmm. Now, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable statement. David tells Joab to go out and count the troops in the army because he wanted to know the size.
Yep.
But what's the problem here?
Well, I think that it was his attitude, right? It's one thing to say, I need to know the number of the standing army, but apparently there's something in the way he asked it that Joab pushed back and said, are you sure you want to do that? I'm not sure that this is something that would please God.
Even Joab pushes back on him.
And Joab wasn't always...
the godly type.
The godly type. Right, so there was something... Joab knew David well enough, and again, this is toward the end of his life, the end of his reign. And we see that he's going to be, he's been making preparations for Solomon to take over. Why is he so interested in the size of the army if God has already promised that Solomon is going to have a kingdom of peace? Something doesn't sit right with Joab, and it certainly doesn't sit right with God.
Okay. Another place to go is First Chronicles, right? Because First Chronicles is right around the same time. A lot of the same things are in here. Of course, different
different perspective.
emphasis.
Yeah. Yep.
So First Chronicles in chapter 21 starts off a little differently. It says Satan moved David to take a census.
Yeah.
So Satan was involved here?
Well, we wouldn't have a problem with that if 2 Samuel chapter 24 didn't start off by saying the Lord's anger raged against Israel and he incited David to take a census. So who did it? Was it God or was it Satan? Because we're pretty sure they're not the same. Right? Those are not the same people, right? So who is it? God or is it Satan? Did we finally?
It could have been Satan got mad, or God got mad and told Satan.
But that's not what it looks like. And so have we finally found an error in the Bible? we found it. Well, in all seriousness, this is a place that people accuse the Bible of contradicting itself. You can't trust the Bible. Either there's an error or a contradiction. The problem is actually a translation issue. Okay, and we don't bring up a lot of translation issues here. We try to not make it so it's like, well, if you don't know Greek and Hebrew, you can't understand your Bible. But sometimes we have to bring this up. And the fact of the matter is that the Hebrew word Satan means adversary or enemy. Okay, it's not always a proper name. And so in First Chronicles, it does not necessarily say Satan, the angel went against David. It just says an enemy went against David and incited him, prompted him to do this. Well, 2 Samuel 24 here says that God was angry with him and incited him to do this. In a very real sense, God was standing opposed to David in this, and he was David's adversary, his Satan, not of course Satan, but he was standing against Israel, or against David as an adversary or an enemy in this one instance. It's true, God could have used Satan to do it as an agent or something, but
have you considered my son Job?
Yeah, right. So we've seen that in Job. But it very well could be that God himself was opposed to David. And it makes sense to me because apparently there was something in David's heart that was not quite right. And he was and so God led him to do this. Didn't make him sin. The sin was already there. David's heart was already away from God in this instance. No, we haven't found a contradiction. We haven't found an error. We have found a translation. We found an error maybe in translation, but not in the text itself.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you bring up Job also, because he recognized that something was wrong there.
Yeah.
But like you said, he stayed with it. Right, and he actually went out and took 8 months and 20 days and did a census.
A very thorough job.
Yeah, so they list a bunch of places he went. It's kind of counterclockwise around Israel.
Yep.
Seems like he went to each army camp, and I'm sure he didn't do the counting, but I'm sure he sat there while people were counting. And got an accurate number.
It seemed like he was counting the reserves, probably, that are spread throughout the land.
Yeah, well, and that brings up the next one, right? Because he counted 800,000 sword-wielding warriors, and in Judah, 500,000 soldiers.
Yeah.
And as you said, if you go back to 2 Chronicles, we see it, but the numbers are different.
The numbers are different in First Chronicles. The numbers are different in Chronicles than we have in Samuel. So we actually have two instances in this same passage where there seems to be a contradiction. But again, if 2 Samuel is presenting the standing army, and First Chronicles is presenting everything, or the reserves rather, and First Chronicles includes the standing army, or the other way. There's a very logical explanation why you may have two different numbers, where one of them is a little bit higher if you include the standing army and not just the reserves.
Right.
So again, I don't see a contradiction. I don't see any reason that these two cannot be harmonized very easily.
So is this a passage where David actually gets to choose his punishment.
Yes. Yeah.
So God gives him 3 choices.
Yep.
And which one does David take and why?
Well, so you could have a plague, you could have an army come in and attack you, and David actually, I think, wisely said, I would rather be attacked by God than a human army. Yeah. Right? I don't want to spend 3 years or he said, I'll take 3 days of a plague, and it ended up killing 70,000 people.
Right.
And so there were a lot of casualty because of David's actions, right?
And it's something as simple as a census, but like you said, it was his heart. And he's in a leadership position.
Yeah, so verse 15, 70,000 people died from Dan to Beersheba. Dan is in the far north and Beersheba is in the far south. It covered the entire country. Right. It covered the entire... When it says Dan to Beersheba, it's like the whole place. It wasn't just little hot spots or whatever. 70,000 Israelites died. But
it did stop before it got to Jerusalem.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Right.
Yep. It did not hit Jerusalem specifically because God stopped. God actually said that's enough.
Right. So then David actually bought the land where it stopped at and made sacrifices there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Yep. And that ended up being where the temple would be built, where Solomon built the temple. And it's really interesting. David almost got a little bit superstitious. He would never worship God anywhere else except this one place after the plague stopped there and everything. So he's 70 years old. He's reigned for 40 years. Is he starting to get a little senile? Is he starting to get a little off maybe? I said superstitious. Is that the right word? Is it, cautious? I don't, want anything like this to ever happen again. I'm only going to worship God right here, whatever. We can see David faltering in his...
Well, I can certainly see. I mean, I'm sure David didn't, whether he did it intentionally or not, right? But him realizing that his action killed 70,000 of his people, and that could happen again, that would certainly make me think more than once.
Yeah, so you put a boundary around yourself. It's sort of like the Pharisees did with the law. We don't want to break the law, so we're also not going to break this or this or this.
Right, and then it gets crazy.
Right, so what David did is said, I don't ever want to have this happen again. Of course, sort of putting words in his mouth. So I'm not going to worship God anywhere except from this spot right here, and I can't go wrong.
Right.
So
that's really the end of the book, which kind of ends on David not dying, like we said, but it is an ending. Yeah,
and he repented. There's no doubt he repented. He got right with God again, but it still ends the book sort of on a sour note,
But I think as we go through 1st and 2nd Kings, there's going to be plenty of sour notes. In fact, they're all going to be sour notes here pretty quick.
Yeah, not many. There's a little bit, but the good times are definitely outweighed by the bad times in the books of the Kings. There's no doubt. Well, as you go through these last couple of chapters, there are some things that we intentionally did not cover that you may be, I wish you would have said this. Share that with us, because we like to know that you're paying attention and the stuff that you find interesting. And of course, if there are questions, and there are a couple of things you might have questions about in this section, feel free to pass those along, and we will help you to the very best of our ability understand the Bible better. That's our goal here. So share this with your friends and family, subscribe, and we will see you back here as we start a new book next time.
Bye.